My name is Chris Finney. I'm an attorney from Cincinnati, Ohio. I drove up to Cleveland last night. Got a warm Cleveland welcome with your snow and ice and weather. I guess you could say, what do you expect in January in Cleveland? But it was actually beautiful. I spent the night Beechwood last night, and some great hospitality. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give some brief introductory remarks and introduce Bill, and let Bill speak for a few minutes. And I'm going to come up and cover the lawsuit in more specifics, and then answer any questions that you all may have. My introductory comments are, just to kind of lay the stage, is under our constitutional system, under our constitutional system, when we elect people, we give them a tremendous amount of power. The power to raise taxes, the power to pass legislation. We empower our elected officials to do all kinds of things. And in fact, we empower them to do all kinds of things we might disagree with. And so I have clients who come to me constantly and ask, because our law firm does this type of litigation, clients come to me regularly and say, you know, my local officials did this, my local officials did that, what can we do to stop them? And I say, well, you have the ballot box. On election day, you can get rid of them, but even though what they do you find offensive, in this instance, it's not illegal. But occasionally, what we find is elected officials fail to understand that there are limits on their authority. So they have tremendous scope of power, but they're not dictators. They're not monarchs under our system of government. And so what happens is we have constitutional limitations under the Ohio Constitution, under the U.S. Constitution, and we have statutory limitations on their authority. And what we find occasionally is that there are elected officials that simply fail to understand that there are limits on the authority that they have in their office. And that's what we found here. It's very simply an abuse of power, and in this case it's actionable. I'm going to talk about that after Bill speaks, but I really want to talk about Bill for just a second. Some of you may be aware we actually sued the city of Maple Heights last October, may have been September, over the red light camera issue. It was another clear instance of abuse of authority. We had collected the signatures necessary to place the red light camera initiative on the ballot as a charter amendment. It was a right not granted by council, in fact, not even granted by the state legislature. The right to place charter amendments on the ballot comes from the Ohio Constitution. It's the governing document for the entire state, and no local elected official has the right to ignore it. No local elected official has the right to amend those requirements. I called the city hall. I said, we've collected the signatures necessary to put the issue on the ballot, and we would like to turn them in. I talked to the city solicitor, or law director, and he said, we're not going to put that on the ballot. I said, I kind of laughed and said, well, you don't understand, you don't have a choice, it's in the Ohio Constitution. He said, no, the issue's in the legislature, the issue's in the courts, we're going to let them decide, we're not going to put your issue on the ballot. I said, well, look, let's just arrange the turn-in of the signatures right now and get me a receipt. We can argue about this later, but you have a job to do. You're obligated under the law to put this on the ballot. We turned them in, and then they proceeded to play games and not put the issue on the ballot. So we sued them at the Ohio Supreme Court. It took about 3 to 4 weeks to brief the issue, and it was all briefed on a Thursday afternoon. And on Friday morning, less than 24 hours after full briefing, the Ohio Supreme Court unanimously told the Council of Maple Heights to put the issue on the ballot. So another clear instance where our elected officials failed to understand the constitutional limits of their authority. Now, Bill's going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you, a pretty harrowing story of abuse of power by the mayor, by the city law director in the town of Maple Heights. It's unfortunate, but like I say, it's something that we see all too often. Our firm is counsel to the Tea Parties against the IRS in the major litigation that you know of throughout the nation of the IRS abusing tax authority. And this is no different, and Bill's going to tell you that story. But what I wanted to say about Bill is just that it takes one more thing. It just doesn't take a good attorney who understands the Constitution to be able to litigate these claims. It takes a brave client who's willing to undergo the slings and arrows, legally, politically, media-wise, in order to take on these battles. Because if we don't stand up to these bullies, if we don't stand up to those that will abuse their authority, they'll continue to do it. And I want to praise Bill for his courage and fortitude in doing that and putting the legal team together necessary for this. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I'm pleased to see you all here, especially members of the community who care about Maple Heights. My remarks will be brief. Today is the natural reaction to the prolonged and wrongful assaults of Mayor Jeffery Lansky. Not only has he vehemently attacked me for 12 long months, not only has he filed a lawsuit attacking my constitutionally protected speech, but he has taken it upon himself, for the most reprehensible of reasons, to pry into my personal income tax information. In January of last year, I was appalled to discover that Mayor Lansky had abused his position as mayor to wrongfully acquire the personal income tax information of multiple residents who had recently run and been elected to council. A breach of trust of this magnitude cannot go unanswered. Therefore, I am filing today a lawsuit of the strongest kind. I hope that this lawsuit will right the wrongs committed and restore order in the government of our city. Such unparalleled abuses cannot and should not be tolerated at any level of government. Thank you for coming. My attorney will now answer any questions that you may have regarding this matter.
Thanks, Bill. You know, in politics, you see things written. Sometimes they're creative, sometimes they're humorous, sometimes they're over the top, but sometimes they're illegal. And such happened this last fall. It actually grew out of the red light camera initiative, but Bill sent me a copy of this brochure, and candidly, I was shocked. I was shocked not just by the creativity and the aggressiveness that was shown by this brochure, but what I was really shocked by was the fact that statutorily protected information of Bill Brownlee was contained in this and published to thousands of people. And this is at the front desk. If anybody didn't get a copy, please do. But on the right-hand side of this sort of, I guess it's designed to scare people. And by the way, it didn't work. The issue passed by 77% of the vote. Probably one of the records I've ever seen for a opposed ballot issue. You had a former United States Senator, I believe the mayor in Cleveland, opposing these initiatives. And both of them passed by more than 3/4 majority of the vote. By the way, that little side note spurred the legislature in their lame duck session to ban these cameras statewide, even in cities that didn't do ballot initiatives, so it's kind of cool. But Bill sent me this, and I was shocked to my core when it said Brownlee did not file and pay no city income taxes for years 2011 to 2013. I said, Bill, that's protected by Ohio statute. And in our system of government, we have protected certain kinds of information by statute that our government officials aren't allowed to release. There's student confidentiality records, there's banking records, there's your tax records, and a few other categories of information, medical records. We simply don't allow the providers, the medical providers, the teachers, and student administrators, and in this case, the tax administrators, from releasing confidential information. As I said before, this is part of the subject of litigation against the IRS in the what's known as the Tea Party litigation as well. When you file your tax returns, whether it's with the federal government, the state, or your little city, you're entitled to believe and to know that that's being handled appropriately and with extreme levels of confidentiality. To make it worse, this isn't just a case of accidental release of information. It was a case of specific, and by the way, this is the third time, there have been 3 times just in the last 12 months that Mayor Lansky has released this information, once at a council meeting, a second time in this brochure, and a third time recently at another council meeting in public. He has disparaged Mr. Brownlee, his political opponent, by saying that he has not filed his tax returns and has not paid his taxes. Mr. Brownlee, as of today, as of the time this brochure was published, for months and months has in fact filed all his tax returns and paid all his taxes. We don't prefer to get into the details of that, but we will today as necessary if you all want. So the information, by the way, by the time this brochure came out and in the most recent pronouncement on the floor of council was completely and simply false. And in fact, the first time it was uttered, it was false as well. But like I say, it makes it worse of the fact that Mr. Brownlee is an intense political opponent of Mayor Lansky. And one of the things that we have seen is that Mayor Lansky, and he's an extraordinary character, I must admit, has sued his political opponents, I think, some 6 times.
More than that.
More than 6 times for defamation, trying to silence political opposition. If he were a non-incumbent and were doing these things with his own resources, he could sort of understand it, but to use and abuse the office of the power of the mayor in the way that he has is most offensive. Now, we are going to find out more information and discovery on this, but the information we have received preliminarily is that Mayor Lansky hasn't just done this bill, but many of his political opponents have been the subject of release of tax information, these defamation suits, and other bullying behaviors that simply are not acceptable in our political system. And I say that in 2 ways. One is the voters should react to people who are bullies by throwing them out of office. But I say 90% of the time, 95% of the time when clients call me with some problem with their local government, my answer is, it might be, you might disagree with what your elected official did, and it might be a really bad thing, but it is within their powers to do so. In this case, Mayor Lansky has stepped well over the line, and he did 3 things that we have sued him over. One is the release on 3 different occasions of Bill Brownlee's personal tax return information. 2 is he ejected him from a council meeting, which he's not allowed to do. And 3, when Bill was videotaping one of the council meetings, the mayor instructed, or the council instructed, and the city solicitor participated in turning off the camera and preventing that accountability by videotaping the council meetings. All these things are First Amendment constitutional violations. The United States Congress and the Civil Rights Act, specifically 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, has given a private cause of action to individuals to sue over those violations, and we have done so. So with that, I'm prepared to answer any questions. I again want to thank and praise Bill for his courageous stand against this, because it really takes a man of fortitude. And he's made it pretty clear to me he's going to see this through to the end, which there'll be a lot of twists and turns, expenses, and pain that will arise from that. But he's made it very clear to us that he intends to see it through to the end and put a stop to this by Mayor Lansky. So with that, I'm prepared to answer any questions you might have.
Is the mayor's defamation lawsuit still active?
Yeah, I'm not representing Bill in that particular lawsuit. Maurice Thompson of the 1851 Center for Constitutional Law is. In my understanding, there's a motion to dismiss that's been filed. Mayor Lansky has filed a response, and that awaits a ruling. That's right.
One of the things you had said was that you accused the mayor of using his power to at least go after people with litigation. I think you had cited 6 months.
Well, I want to be clear. Where I think the abuse of power using the office of the mayor is occurring is by obtaining, just to begin with, obtaining confidential tax information, because my understanding, and this is just coming from third parties, I've done none of my own investigation of this, is that he, for his political opponents at least, and perhaps every member of council, gathers their personal tax return information and then disseminates it, as he did here, in a manner that is illegal. So that's the abuse of power. I don't know if there are any other instances of abuse of city authority, but to me that alone should send chills down the spine of every resident of Maple Heights, knowing that this mayor is willing to go into the city files, take your tax return information, and share it with others for his own political advantage. That needs to stop. But that's the specific abuse of power that I was referring to, but it's happened to my knowledge on multiple occasions.
Can I ask you, how upsetting is this in your city? You decided to run for office, you got elected, and you've seen what you claim are abuse of power. How upsetting is this to you?
Well, I can tell you that in January, when the first striking abuse happened, I was dumbstruck not only at what was happening, but how it was happening, and the indifference of the rest of the city officials to what was happening. I didn't know honestly what to think at the time. I was completely taken aghast, especially having only been on council for a couple of weeks.
I have a question. Why is Jackie Albers being named in this lawsuit?
The other officials are people who have participated, to my understanding, in the release, the illegal release of the information in question.
That's not right. There are multiple claims in this lawsuit. Some of them, which you're referring to, are First Amendment claims. Freedom of speech, which was hindered in May at a council meeting, as well as other instances, by those who were in power during the conducting of those meetings.
So it had to do with the shutting off of the camera and the ejectment?
Yes, had to do with being ejected from a council meeting wrongfully, as well as having a recording of that public meeting unlawfully terminated.
Counselor, can you talk a little bit, you're the expert here in the law, when you've seen a council person kicked out of a public meeting, and then a video camera that was filming that meeting tossed out the door too? I mean, is this unusual, do you think?
There was a lawsuit down in Cincinnati recently about a congressman who terminated a recording at a public meeting. I think that the level of abuse of power by this mayor is extraordinary, and the city is extraordinary. But the kinds of lawsuits that we're talking about, in fact, the whole issue of videotaping and the accountability that people using their cell phones, I see, to take pictures and record, the whole level of accountability that's bringing to police conduct, to the public life it's been fully developed by the courts by now, but within the last 10 years, that's when that development mostly occurred. But we've had this kind of abuse before, but I would say it's still quite unusual.
Question to Mr. Brownlee. Do you have aspirations to run for mayor for the city of Maple?
I've been asked on multiple occasions if I would. What I want to do at this point in time is restore the dignity back to the residents of Maple Heights who've been abused for decades, really, in my opinion, as I look back at the history of the city. I have not made the determination yet. That's a personal decision my wife and I will have to make. It'll have impacts for our family and our life for years to come. So, no, there's no commitment to anything like that.
Do you see this lawsuit as any sort of retaliation for you referenced multiple claims that the mayor had filed, but I know that there was one filed against your client. Is this lawsuit in any way considered retaliation?
It really isn't. We consciously didn't want it to be a counterclaim in that lawsuit. We evaluated the claims separately, but I think the point that I'm making is that every now and then in our government you have an elected official who's just raging out of control, and that's my opinion of what's going on here with Mayor Lansky. And I think it's important, not in the broad picture, but in the specific instance of the release of tax information and the kicking him out of a council meeting and preventing the videotaping of a council meeting. It's important to rein him in. Someone else is handling reining him in the other area. And the other suits, I think, have all ended adversely to the mayor. I'm not sure of that.
Not favorably.
And so, at some point he needs to be brought to task for what he's doing. And this is part of that, but certainly isn't a specific reaction to those other things. It's a reaction to what happened in these three specific instances.
Has your lawsuit been officially filed yet?
It was filed this morning.
And just for the record, Can you, Council, say your name and spell it for us, please?
Sure, and I didn't bring enough cards for everybody, or maybe I did I do have them in my bag, but it's Christopher Finney, Finney. Christopher is the traditional spelling, Christopher. I'm an attorney from Cincinnati, Ohio, a firm of 7 attorneys, and we practice extensively in the public interest and constitutional arena. Like I say, we handled the lawsuit against Maple Heights to get the red light camera initiative on the ballot this past fall. And that was at the Ohio Supreme Court.
That is it. Thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. And if you have any more questions, feel free to contact myself or my legal counsel.